A very good evening to all students and staff to this webinar, organized by the Institute for Pedagogical Innovation, Research and Excellence, or INSPIRE in short. My name is Sally, and I'll be your MC for the session. Before we begin, allow me to run through some housekeeping matters. Please note that the session is recorded, and if you do not wish to be in the recording, please inform any of us by direct messaging any of the Inspire staff before we begin. The slides and the recording will be posted on Inspire social media channel when they are ready. If you have any questions for the speaker, please feel free to key into the chat, the Zoom chat, and my colleagues will collate the questions back end so that the speaker will address at the end of the session. Now, let me introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Dr. Jules White is Senior Advisor to the Chancellor, Director of Vanderbilt's Initiative on the Future of Learning and Generative AI, and Professor of Computer Science in the Department of Computer Science at Vanderbilt University. He created one of the first online classes for prompt engineering on Coursera. He has also published more than 160 papers, and his research has won multiple Best Paper awards. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Jules White. Dr. White, please.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a topic that I care a lot about because if you had, in 2022 in November, at the beginning of November, if you had told me this thing called ChatGPT is going to come out in about a month, and here's what it's going to be able to do, I would have told you as a professor in computer science, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. It's not going to happen at the end of the month. In fact, I'm not going to live to see something of that ability. And ChatGPT and generative AI and all of these large language models are doing things that I fundamentally did not think would be possible in my career. And I'm a computer science professor. I'm supposed to be looking up into the telescope out into where we're going and imagining what we would achieve. And I just didn't think it was possible. Now, one of the things that's really been exciting to me is I teach this course on prompt engineering on Coursera, and I'm getting to see, because people email me and they show me examples of what they are doing with generative AI throughout industry, and it's absolutely fascinating. And so what I want to kind of show you today is sort of the depth of capability of generative AI and how it's really going to revolutionize how we do computing. Now, to get started, I think it's helpful to have sort of a shared image of what generative AI is and thinking about generative AI. So I think of generative AI kind of like text messaging. So just like you could go in and you could type in a text message and you could send it off to your friend, and your friend could text you back an answer, or they could take a photo of something and send you the photo back in response, or they could record a voice and send it back to you. Generative AI works very, very similarly, except you go in and you type in a message and you send it off, and generative AI responds, and it can send you back text. It can send you back an image. It can send you back a video, all kinds of things. And that message that you type in and send to the generative AI is called a prompt. So these are all examples of prompts that you could write to generative AI. None of them are particularly good prompts, but just like if you had a friend, you could send them a message saying, write a poem about the French Revolution. And if you had the right type of friend, they could respond to you with a poem about the French Revolution. And if you had the right type of friend, you could say, create a Pokemon game for my child, and they could text you back. And generative AI is like the friend that always responds. No matter what you send them, no matter what message, generative AI will always come up with a result. And that's part of the power of generative AI. And we'll talk about that more. Now, one of the things that drives me nuts when I start talking about generative AI with people, and when I really look at the news, and this is starting to change, is people are constantly saying, well, I asked ChatGPT this question, and it gave me this imperfect or bad answer. Therefore, generative AI and ChatGPT is completely useless. Like, how would anybody ever rely on this? It makes all kinds of mistakes. And this is really the wrong way of thinking about this technology. This technology really, really shines when we start building content through a conversation and refining it iteratively over a series of messages or prompts. We don't just go and ask a question and expect a perfect outcome in one go. And that's what you see in the news. I asked ChatGPT this, it said this, it was wrong, therefore it's useless. We have to think about it instead of how to work iteratively to build content. So I'm going to give you an example of this, and I'm going to give you a task that I don't think that there is a human being in Nashville where I live that can do this task as well or as fast as ChatGPT. And this is 3.5. This isn't even 4. But I bet you would have a hard time finding a human being anywhere in the world that is going to perform this task as well. So here's my task. Please create a meal plan for my family that is based on a fusion of food from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan. I want to eat keto and up to 2,000 calories per day. Pick dishes where the ingredients are easy to get from an average US grocery store. And I don't know if keto is a popular dieting option there, but here in the US, keto is a low carbohydrate dieting option. Now, if I had to find somebody in Nashville to do this for me, it would be hard, and they wouldn't be able to do this very quickly. Now, what does ChatGPT say? It says, sure, here's a sample meal plan that combines flavors from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan while also being keto friendly and within a 2,000 calorie per day limit. Breakfast, scrambled eggs with sauteed onions, tomatoes, and Ethiopian berber spice mix. And then notice what it does. In parentheses, it says made with chili powder, paprika, garlic powder, ginger, cumin, and coriander, because it's signaling that you can get these ingredients at an average US grocery store. Berber spice mix is something that exists, and here's what it is. That's really sophisticated reasoning. And before ChatGPT came out, we had nothing of this sophistication and reasoning. I don't think we had anything even close. Now, if we saw this in the news, the next thing people would say is, oh, look how bad ChatGPT is. You said 2,000 calories per day, and it didn't even give you serving sizes for how much to eat. So this is obviously flawed out, but how could anybody ever trust this? Well, this is the wrong way of thinking about using these tools. And you really want to think about them. You can imagine if somebody handed Michelangelo a new hammer and he walked up to a piece of stone and he hit the stone once and he looked at the stone and he said, it's not a beautiful sculpture. And he looked at the tool and he said, this is a terrible tool. And he threw the tool down on the ground and he said, why would anybody ever use this tool? And that's what we're doing when we're expecting ChatGPT to get the answer in the first time. No, what Michelangelo would do is he would take the tool, the hammer, and he would continue to hit the stone and chip away at it until he had a beautiful sculpture. And he would also understand that his skill with the tool was equally important. And so we have to do the same thing with these generative AI tools like ChatGPT. So we really care about 2,000 calories per day and serving size. We just follow up and we say, can you give me an approximate serving size for myself for each dish that was within my 2,000 calorie limit? And then it comes back and now we have 2 eggs, half a cup of onions, half a cup of tomatoes. Now, people could still take issue if you're a keto dieter. You might say half a cup of onions is too much, too many carbohydrates. And if I really cared about that, I could continue to ask questions and refine that aspect of the content. But I'm going to take it in a different direction to show you the power of generative AI and how it's going to change computing. So my real problem at home is not that I need to hit certain carbohydrate targets or serving sizes. It's that I've got a 9-year-old son. He actually just turned 10 a few days ago. And he's a pretty adventurous eater, but sometimes the battle is to get him to try the dish at the beginning. So I'm going to see if ChatGPT can help me with this. So I say, my son is 9. Sometimes he won't try new dishes. To make this culinary adventure more fun for him, can you create a short Pokemon battle story to go with each dish? I'll read the stories with him before dinner to get him excited about trying the new food. Make sure the story ends with a cliffhanger that will motivate him to try the food. Now, that's an incredibly sophisticated task, and I personally would have a hard time doing it. To try to build Pokemon battle stories to excite my 9-year-old to try different dishes on the meal plan and have them end with a cliffhanger, that's a really sophisticated task. So what does ChatGPT say? It says, sure, Pikachu and his friends were exploring the wilds of Ethiopia when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of sneaky Pokemon thieves. As they raced through the dense jungle, they stumbled upon a hidden cave filled with treasure. And then it goes on to say, in the end, they emerged victorious, but not before the dragon left a fiery spice that imbued their breakfast eggs with a flavorful kick. Can you help Pikachu and his friends defeat the Berber dragon and enjoy this spicy breakfast? That's really good. Like it understood the concept of a cliffhanger to motivate a 9-year-old to try the breakfast dish. Really sophisticated. And we didn't have anything in computing of that sophistication before ChatGPT came out. And I thought about it and I was like, what else do we do with my son at the dinner table? And I thought, well, we love to talk with him about what he's learning in school. And he loves math and he loves to play math games on an iPad. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could get ChatGPT to play a math game with my son? And so I said, I'd like you to play a math game with my 9-year-old to teach him about division with fractions and nutrition. Ask him questions one at a time involving Pokemon in these topics and make it into a game. When he wins, the Pokemon win. And I'm beginning to use some prompt engineering, which is basically part of prompt engineering is how you structure your language in order to get certain interactions. So I'm beginning to use that. And so what does ChatGPT say? Question 1, Pikachu and his friends are planning a meal that includes half a cup of cooked rice, but they need to divide it evenly among 3 Pokemon. How much rice will each Pokemon get? And now notice all I did is I gave it a paragraph of text, and suddenly it's given me questions that are on the topic. We're in the same conversation, and we've gone from the meal plan now to Pokemon questions involving fractions and nutrition. And then what does ChatGPT do? It waits for my son to respond because it understands the concept of a game, and it understands now this is the point in the game where it needs to stop and wait for his answer. And then if he goes and he types 1/6 then, which is the correct answer, it says, good job. It works out the math for him. And then it goes on to the next question. Ash wants to make a smoothie. Now that is transformational. If I had to program that as a computer scientist, that would take a ton of time and effort for me to program that. And all I did was gave it basically a couple of sentences. And suddenly we've got an interactive game. That is transformative from an educational perspective and how we can go and create educational content. But it's also transformative from a computing perspective because of how rapidly I can go and do things like that. And then as a computer scientist, I thought about it and I was like, well, this is exciting, but I'd really like to have actual software that I can run on an iPad or somewhere else so he could play this game. And so I just used some of my domain knowledge and I say, let's create code for it in Python, which is a programming language. And I give it some additional constraints and it goes through and it generates the software in Python. And this is it running now in a browser that could be on an iPad or it could be on my laptop. So in just a few paragraphs of text, I went from generation of this really complicated meal plan to Pokemon battle stories to motivate a 9-year-old to eat them, to an interactive math game, to actual software. And nothing that we had in computing had that level of sophistication and flexibility before ChatGPT came out. There's generative AI tools, and there's many more now. It's Anthropic's tools. We have Google's tools. We have the open source ones from Mistral and Llama. These things are going to absolutely transform what we can do. But it's really, people miss sort of the bigger picture, which is it's changing how we interact with computing. And so I want to show you what that looks like using some examples from Vanderbilt. This is the Vanderbilt travel and business expense policy that governs what you can get paid back for when you go on a business trip or if you buy something. And I always joke that I've had a lot of expenses rejected because of this policy, and I've never actually read it. But that's not completely true because I've read it using a tool called ChatGPT Code Interpreter. It's now called ChatGPT Advanced Data Analysis, and now it's actually directly integrated in ChatGPT Plus. So it keeps changing very rapidly, but I'm going to show you the example from months ago, and now it's even more sophisticated. So I uploaded the travel and business expense policy into ChatGPT, and I said, please read the provided document so you can answer questions about it. And then I go and ask it a question that looks like what I actually ask. I say, let's assume I'm in a foreign country, traveling in a taxi, and it breaks down on the way to an important meeting. Can I get reimbursed if I pay someone to drive me on the back of their motorcycle to the meeting? Assume they are a private citizen. What does ChatGPT say? It says, based on the information provided in the document. So first thing to point out here is people have this misconception that these models stopped training in 2022 or 2023, and therefore they don't know anything about your data, and so they can't do anything relevant with your data. But that's not true, because you can give them the information in a prompt or a message that you want it to respond to or reason about. So it says, based on the information provided in the document, using that travel policy, the university requires travelers to select the most reasonable and economical form of transportation. That's true. It's a direct statement from that policy. Non-conventional transportation options are not explicitly mentioned. That is also true. And Vanderbilt does not have a separate policy on ride sharing. And that is a direct statement from that policy. Given these points, it seems plausible that in an emergency situation where no other reasonable and economical form of transportation is available, the cost of transportation by a private citizen's motorcycle might be considered an allowable expense. However, the university's policy does not explicitly state this, and reimbursement may be subject to review. Now, I presented this in front of all the Vanderbilt business managers, and they basically all agreed this is a completely accurate answer. Now, it's one thing to be able to answer questions and cite parts of the text. It's another thing to understand the policy well enough to apply it to a document. So in the same conversation, I followed up and I gave it a rental car receipt. And I said, please analyze the attached receipt and let me know if it complies with the policy. ChatGPT comes back, and I want to draw your attention to this highlighted part at the bottom, the collision damage waiver, which is a type of insurance. It says for domestic travel, the collision damage waiver should be declined as rental vehicles are fully insured through Vanderbilt's insurance portfolio. The receipt shows a charge for CDW, which may not comply if this is domestic travel. That is incredibly sophisticated. If I had to go and build a system and program it, it would take a team of programmers, and it would probably take me years to get something that is inflexible and good as that, and identifying random receipts and whether or not they comply. And all I had to do to get there was to give it the document that I wanted it to reason with, give it the receipt I wanted it to apply the knowledge from the document to, and it began reasoning really effectively. That is transformative in terms of capability and what we can do from a computing perspective. Now, this is the Vanderbilt Instructional and Enrollment Report. This is about a 20-page PDF that's put out by the registrar. It has all kinds of enrollment information. And I took this, and if I wanted to analyze it before, I would have been copying and pasting out of this report into Excel, for example, in order to do some visualization. I'm going to take it, I'm going to upload it into Code Interpreter, and I'm just going to say, let's start off really doing an easy task, which is just take each page and extract it as plain text. And it goes and does that, and it gives me links to where I could go and download each page. Now I'm going to do something more interesting. Through a series of prompts, I'm going to get it in a format, and I'm going to say, turn it into an Excel file for me. And it's going to turn that data into an Excel file that I can then download and go into work directly in the tool. So I don't have to go through cutting and pasting to try to figure out how to work with that data. But the interesting thing is that why would I even go out to Excel anymore when directly in the tool I can just say, give me 4 interesting visualizations of the data. Now notice what I'm not telling. I'm not telling it what to visualize or how or what colors or what types of visualizations. I'm just saying, give me 4 interesting things. And it generates 4 visualizations of the data. They may not be very good. They may not be perfect, but I can then go and start exploring the data very rapidly to look at and understand what's there and asking better questions and spending my time doing the analysis as opposed to trying to code in Python or Tableau or Excel and trying to generate these things. Now, I thought about it. And if I was producing these visualizations, it's probably because I'm going to give a presentation. So can it help me to automate the creation of the PowerPoint presentation? So I uploaded my slide template and I said, save each of these visualizations as an image, then insert each of these images as separate slides into the attached PowerPoint. And then I give it some information about how I want it laid out, and I tell it to put a text box next to each visualization describing what it is. And it goes through and it generates the PowerPoint file and then gives me a link to download it. And this is the PowerPoint that it created. It's got each of the visualizations as a separate slide. And then it's got a text box next to each visualization describing what it is. Now, this is really revolutionary, but it's revolutionary for a reason that's far more transformative than most people realize, and people should be talking about it all the time. And the reason is, imagine if you went out into your yard or out somewhere and you went to dig a hole and you pick up a shovel and you go to dig, and right before you go to dig, your shovel looks down at the ground and it sees that there's a rock in the way. And your shovel jumps out of your hands and your shovel builds a pickaxe and it uses the pickaxe to break up the rock. And then your shovel jumps back into your hands and you continue digging. And that is your shovel goes and builds itself a tool, uses that tool, and then helps you finish and accomplish your goal. And that's exactly what we're seeing with these tools now, is they can build their own tools to help you accomplish goals. So the interface to this looks different now in ChatGPT, but I'm going to show it to you with this older version because it's very easy to see. So in the older version, when you would go and you would ask it to do something like save each visualization as a separate image or create a PowerPoint presentation, a little gray box like this would pop up like you see on the screen. And that box is it building a tool for itself. It is on its own figuring out a tool that it needs and to accomplish the work, and it's going and building that tool. And if you clicked on it, it would show you the tool it built, which is software. It coded in Python and wrote a Python program in order to produce those visualizations, save them as images, and turn them into a PowerPoint presentation. It then ran its own tool or software. It looked at the output, decided if it was correct or not, and it'll go back and forth doing this multiple times. And then when it got it right, it gave me the PowerPoint file. It basically did what a software engineer does, but it did it on the fly in the background based on my description of what I wanted. It went and built tools to accomplish that goal. That's fundamentally revolutionary in computing. When people realized that gorillas were taking blades of grass and putting them into termite mounds as tools, everybody was super excited. This is software that is going and writing its own software dynamically to help you accomplish a problem. It's building its own tools. That's fundamentally revolutionary. So generative AI is going to completely transform how we interact with computing and what we can do with it. Now, what do we learn about it, right? It's just a bunch of text. You just go tell it anything you want. And unfortunately, that's not correct. So some people have this mental model of, these large language models like ChatGPT as internet search, where you go and type in what you want and you get back facts. And that's not correct. They are not designed to give you facts back. That is not what their strong suit is. The other thing that people have, this misconception, is you can go type in anything you want, and it doesn't matter how you structure the problem or how you state it. It should just be able to magically get it right. And you don't have to worry about what you say and how you structure things. And that's incorrect too. It really matters how you break the problem down, how you express it in text. Now, I want to give you some intuition behind how these models were trained and how that influences how we want to think about solving problems with them. These models were taught to predict the next word in a sentence. So they would have shown it something like the nursery rhyme, and they would have said, Mary had a little, and they would try to get it to predict lamb as the next word. Then they would show it Mary had a little lamb, and they try to get it to predict its. And then they'd show it Mary had a little lamb, its, and they try to get it to predict fleece. And they did this over and over on huge amounts of text off the internet. And over time, it learns how patterns in the language on the left-hand side influence the next word that should come. Now, the left-hand side is basically your prompt, and the right-hand side is the first word it's going to generate. And basically, word by word, it's answering you. But it really matters the patterns in your language, and it's learning to respond to patterns in your language. So part of our research at Vanderbilt is understanding how to document patterns in language and ways of structuring your language with expressing a problem in order to solve different important problems with this new technology. And then documenting those building blocks and teaching them to people that they can go and use and adapt those patterns to innovate with. So I'm going to give you an example of one of the ones that I think is the most fascinating and showcases really the unique computing capabilities of this new technology. And it's called the persona pattern. Now, in the real world, we know how to solve problems not by solving them ourselves, but by going to the person or organization that knows how to solve it. So if I have a question about nutrition, I would go and talk to a nutritionist. I don't necessarily know how they're going to answer my question, how they're going to arrive at the answer, what the format will be, but I know I can talk to them and ask. I know I can go and talk to a doctor. Or if I have a particular government entity that I need to interact with in the US for your taxes, it's the IRS, I can go and ask the IRS about my taxes. But I don't know how they're going to arrive at their answer. I don't know what they're going to do. It turns out we can do something very similar to this, and we can solve problems in a similar way with generative AI. And it's through the persona pattern. We simply say, act as some persona. And what's interesting is it will completely change how the generative AI responds. So I'm going to give you an example of this that is very close to home. So my wife is a speech language pathologist. And so basically that means she tests kids before they go into kindergarten and start school to see if they have any issues with their speech or their understanding of language. And so I'm going to say, act as a speech language pathologist to ChatGPT. I'm going to tell it the persona that I want it to reason with. I'm going to tell you what a 3-year-old said, and you will write an assessment for me. The child said, I need way woy. And so I tried to think about what my son sounded like at 3 and try to capture it in text. Didn't do a very good job, but let's see what ChatGPT says. It says, based on the provided speech sample, it appears the child may be experiencing some phonological and articulation errors, which are common in children around this age. Consonant errors. It seems the child is having difficulty with the production of some consonant sounds, specifically the N and L sounds. The child said mead instead of need and woy instead of toy, assuming the intended words were need and toy. And it goes on and it says syllable structure. It is possible the child intended to say play, but produced way instead, which suggests a substitution of the initial consonant cluster PL with a single consonant W. Now, notice what I didn't ask ChatGPT for. I didn't ask it for syllable structure or consonants or articulation or any of these things, but I gave it a persona of a speech language pathologist, and it completely changed how it output and reasoned. That is fundamentally a new capability in computing that we've never had before. Now, one of the other things that's really interesting is we have spent so much time in artificial intelligence in the past of trying to build individual specialized models to do one thing. We would build a specialized model to detect license plates. We would build a natural language processing system to do some simple task. But these new models in generative AI are able to do many different things. And one of the interesting things is called multimodal prompting, where you give photographs or other things in your prompt as well. Kind of like we can text a photo from a friend and say, what is this? How do I fix it? How do I do that? We can do the same thing with these models. And they can generalize and answer and solve all kinds of interesting problems. GPT-4 Vision, I think, is one of the most, if not the most advanced computer vision system on the planet. And I'm going to give you some examples of why I think it's so revolutionary. So I was at dinner with some friends the other night, and unfortunately, one of the friends said, I've never done anything with ChatGPT. And unfortunately, he was sitting next to the wrong person to say that to. And I was like, well, let me show you. And so I took a picture of the table where we were eating, and I asked the question, who needs a refill? Now, just to give you a sense of this would be a very, very difficult computer vision problem. And if I had to solve this, I would have to go and spend a ton of time building and training a computer vision model. And it would probably be very, very tough to make this work well. And this is not a great photo to do this with. But I just took the photo, I gave it to GPT-4 Vision and ChatGPT, and I said, who needs a refill? And it says, it looks like the glass with ice water is still fairly full, while the beer bottle seems to be nearly empty, so someone might want a refill in the beer soon. That is incredibly sophisticated computer vision. And I built basically an entire refill detector. It's a thing I could use over and over simply by giving it a photograph and a question. Then I thought, well, can it help me order? Because the waitress had just walked up while I was talking to my friend, and I wasn't picking a menu item. And so I just tried to get ChatGPT's help in picking what I should eat on the menu. And I said, I'm feeling indecisive and out of time. The waitress is here. Everyone is waiting on me. I need a quick keto option. And I snapped a picture of the menu and I gave it this question. And it came back and it said, go for the grilled chili relleno with smoked chicken and sliced avocado. It's a keto-friendly option that's low in carbs and high in fat and protein. Now, the first time I looked at this, I was like, oh, I got it. I caught it making a mistake. And I looked up and I said, look, the chili relleno has corn in it. Corn isn't very keto. It's okay. ChatGPT makes mistakes. And then later I went and I looked back and I realized I had made the mistake because it said the grilled chili relleno, which is below the chili relleno, and it does not have corn in it. It just has smoked chicken and sliced avocado, which could be keto. So it actually had a better vision than me. And then I looked up at this light fixture and I thought it was a really interesting light fixture. And I thought, I wonder how I would make that on my own at home. Could I try to build my own version of it? And so I snapped a picture of it and I said, give me a detailed step-by-step plan for creating a do-it-yourself version of this light fixture. Also, give me a complete list of materials that I will need with identifiers like 1A, 1B, and then reference them in the step-by-step plan. Now, that is an incredibly sophisticated task with a bad photo of a light fixture. Now, what does ChatGPT do? Well, it gave me a very long set of instructions to build this thing, including all of the materials. And this is a little excerpt from it. Take the metal wire 1A and start by shaping it into multiple circles of different diameters. Use the pliers 1B for more precision. Connect the circles together using small wire segments to create a similar 3D shape as in the image. And it went on and on and on, explaining basically how to make the light fixture. Now, you could also snap a picture of what you're eating and say, give me a recipe to cook this, or give me different possible recipes to cook this. It's a fundamentally transformative thing. And that level of sophistication in computer vision, difficult, if not impossible, to achieve with any other technique. And then I was going camping with some friends that weekend, and I thought, I wonder if it can help make sure that I bought everything that I'm supposed to bring on this camping trip. And so one of my friends had texted me a list of what I was responsible for. And I was responsible for breakfast burritos. And she had texted me what I wanted to bring or was supposed to bring. And so I copied and pasted that text message into ChatGPT. I took a photograph of everything I bought at the grocery store. And then I said, extract an inventory of what we bought. We were going camping and we're asked to make breakfast burritos with this recipe. Did we miss anything in our shopping? And it comes back and it says tortillas are missing, eggs are missing, hash browns are missing. And then it says bacon present, assuming the meat in the plastic bag is bacon. And this is bacon in that plastic bag. That is fundamentally transformative, a really difficult task with computer vision. This is an example where I dug up, and this is something I use it for all the time. Simple example in an educational setting. If you've ever taken notes on a whiteboard and then thought, man, now I got to capture that into the computer somehow. So I took some really bad notes about a grading policy on a whiteboard. I snapped a picture of it and I said, everyone agrees that we should implement this new grading policy, extract it and draft an email basically. And it goes and reads the board, which is not at all clear what it is, extracts a grading policy that accurately reflects what we wrote on the board, and then turns it into an email, which is later after this. And just to showcase and kind of highlight the depth of sophistication of these new models in reasoning, not only about text, but also about imagery, I took this picture off of Amazon, and it is a picture of some finger puppets that you can buy. And it's a squirrel finger puppets. And I asked it the question, how many squirrels were hurt in the making of this photo? Incredibly sophisticated question. And it comes back and it says, it's likely that no squirrels were harmed. The image appears to show novelty or costume finger puppets designed to look like squirrels. Such products are typically made from materials like rubber or silicone. The depth of reasoning that's required from a computer vision and just underlying computing perspective to accomplish what was just done and answer that question is profound, absolutely profound. And those types of capabilities just did not exist before in computing. And we certainly didn't have that natural of an interface to them where we just take a picture and ask a question, and suddenly we have some of the most sophisticated computer vision models on the planet. No, before you had to be a deep learning specialist and programmer and do vast amount of work to accomplish what we just did with an image and some text. And this brings me to one of the things that's going to really transform what happens in computing, and that is everybody can program with prompts. This is no longer, programming is not something that is isolated to computer scientists and software engineers. A vast amount of programming and reasoning can now be done by end users just directly with prompts. So I'm going to give you a simple example of this. I'm going to write a program totally in prompts. So here's my program. Whenever you generate output, turn it into a comma-separated value list. So this is a CSV file, just like you could import into Excel. It's basically tabular data where the columns are separated by commas. So you would have like name, comma, title, comma, age, comma, or something like that. Now, I'm going to give it input into my program. In the next prompt, I'm going to say, my name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now, what does it say? Name, comma, course, Jules White, comma, prompt engineering. It ran my program on my input and gave me the output. This is a CSV output, which is exactly what I asked it for. Now, if I looked at this, I didn't specify what columns I wanted. And if I went back and said, I'd like different columns, how do I modify my program? Well, in a follow-up prompt, I just modify what I want. And I say, from now on, the columns of the comma separated value list should be name, comma, course, comma, role. So I've just modified my program. And now I'm going to run it again with exactly the same input. My name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now it says name, comma, course, comma, role, Jules White, comma, prompt engineering, comma, teacher. So I modified my program and I reran it on new output. And so it is basically reasoning and running my program. Now, to do that before, I would have to be a computer scientist. I would have to know how to program. It's also doing something really sophisticated, which is semantics. It understands the language in the sentence, and it's mapping it into the correct columns. Really difficult to do, also has huge implications for extracting structured data from the world. Now I'm going to modify my program again, and I'm going to do something that would be incredibly difficult to do with traditional programming. In addition to whatever I type in, generate additional examples that fit the format of the CSV that I've asked you to produce. And then I run it again with my same input. My name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now it says name, comma, course, comma, role, Jules White, prompt engineering teacher, and it adds additional fake data that meets it. That's incredibly difficult to do that any other way in computing. So I'm going to give you a more sophisticated example that anybody in here could do. And this is kind of beginning to showcase what's going to happen in industry and in all these different places where we interact with computing. So I always have this problem I get so much email, it's so hard to sort through it all. So I just say, okay, I'm going to solve this problem with generative AI. Act as my personal assistant. Whenever I give you a long email thread, you will create a bulleted list of questions and action items for me. The bullets should be numbered. If I type in a number of a bullet, you will summarize the conversation from the email chain around that bullet in one paragraph. If I type in a bullet and a number, you will draft a reply for me to read with that many paragraphs. So I've just written a whole program saying, here's how you want you to summarize my email. And if I respond with this, you do this. If I respond with this other thing, you do something different. And then I copied and pasted a gigantic email chain. No, didn't remove formatting or anything. I just directly copied this big, long email chain where we were scheduling this course that we were going to be teaching on generative AI last fall. And there are 5 different instructors. There are multiple other people involved in the scheduling of this course. Very long back and forth email chain. And it breaks it down and summarizes it just like I asked. Question and action items. What should be included in the catalog description? Are the settings for the course entry? And yes is our course scheduling system. Have the room and schedule been finalized? This is 1.7 at the bottom. Have the room and schedule been finalized Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 in Engineering Science Building 048? That's ESB. I follow up and I ask it about 1.7. And it says, in the email thread, the team discusses the room and schedule for the course. Shiro suggests the Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 a.m. time slot, but the only available room at that time is Engineering and Science Building room 048 with a capacity of 60. Jules approves of this room choice, mentioning that it's a good size for the first run of the class. The conversation does not provide any further details on the room and schedule, so it seems that the team has agreed on Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 a.m. 048. Now, this is exactly what happened. We had 5 different faculty members. 2 of us responded and said, yeah, that room seems great. Nobody else responded, so that became the room. And it accurately picked up on what was happening. We said yes, nobody else responded, so that's basically what we defaulted to, and that's the room that we taught in last semester. So 2 fundamentally new things are happening in computing. One is that it has totally unique capabilities for solving problems that we have never had anything close to. The squirrel finger puppets and be able to have that depth of reasoning. being able to, create a Pokemon game for my child and then turn it into software really fast, or reason with a persona. Fundamentally new problem solving and reasoning capabilities, new computing capabilities to solve problems. And second, it changes our interface to computing. Before, you had a graphical user interface, and whatever buttons or menu options the programmer had put there was what you were limited to. So if there wasn't a button there for it, you couldn't do it. Unless you were a programmer, which you could go write whatever you wanted at great time and expense. And this is something new that can do both things. It can have the flexibility of being able to program what you want, but with the intuitiveness of a graphical user interface where you just go and express it in natural language. And it's going to completely change how flexibly we can interact with computing and how easy it is for most people to go and do really sophisticated and complex things. Now, everybody's talking about it in terms of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence to replace people, but I don't think of it in terms of artificial intelligence. And in fact, I think this is the wrong way of thinking about it. I think we want to be talking about augmented intelligence. We shouldn't be trying to replace people with some artificial substitute. In fact, instead, we want to augment and amplify human creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills, and help them to do more and solve bigger problems. And in fact, I think of generative AI as essentially like an exoskeleton for the mind that you can put on to solve bigger problems, to, amplify that unique creative aspect of who you are as a person, not to replace me. And in fact, I tell students all the time, in this model of augmented intelligence, because there was so much discussion about cheating at the beginning, which I'm really upset that was the discussion around one of the most fundamentally transformative computing technologies of our lifetime, is that we talk about it in terms of cheating on exams. This is the worst and silliest use case of it, and is completely missing how important it's going to be. But I tell students all the time, if all you're doing is copying and pasting somebody else's question into generative AI and getting an answer, and then copying and pasting the answer back, it's not augmenting or amplifying any part of you. You're completely missing out on what it's doing. But if you go and ask unique questions, if you follow up with better questions, if you take what it's producing as a draft output and improve it and follow up on it, if you think about how to really creatively guide it to produce better things, that's what it's all about. And one of the simplest ways you can do that is always have it produce multiple options for you. Always be having to think about what it's producing and how to improve upon it, how to do more with it. Always look at whatever it's producing as draft. And the goal of it is to amplify and augment you. And you want to make sure that you are part of that. Now, if you're interested in learning more, how can you learn more about prompt engineering? And I'll, of course, give a plug. I teach a course on prompt engineering. It's free to audit the course and go through all the videos and everything. If you want a certificate, they charge you for that, but it's on Coursera and it's available as well. If you'd prefer to read about things, I have a number of papers on this topic, in particular on the prompt patterns. The first paper listed here is one that is aimed at anybody in any discipline and has a number of patterns that you can apply to all kinds of disciplines, like the persona pattern. And I really cannot stress how transformative generative AI is going to be. People ask me, what industries are going to be affected by generative AI? And I say, if that person in that job has a phone, like a smartphone, or they interact with a computer in any shape or way or form, if they have email, if they, do text messaging, anything, doesn't matter how they're interacting with computing, they are going to be impacted by generative AI because it's going to transform how we do all of those things. All of those communication channels, everything we do is going to be fundamentally impacted. And I believe in a really positive and exciting way. It's transformed my ability to solve problems, my creativity. And I hope that you will take the time to explore and experiment with it and discover what you can do with generative AI. And right now is the time to be doing it. We're still at the very beginning. We haven't, we've barely built out what's there. And this is the time to be somebody that's creating that new business, that's creating that new idea, that's just exploring that new research on it, because this is like the ground floor of the most incredible advance from my perspective in my lifetime from a technology perspective. So thank you so much for coming to this presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. So it looks like the first question is GPT 3.5 or the free plan good enough for a typical newcomer? Yeah, absolutely. So 3.5 is great. Now, I view these tools, I mean, and there's also other great ones. So there's Anthropic Claude, there's Mistral has a model that's out that's really good as well. There's lots of excellent ones. ChatGPT 3.5 is a great one. I view this as I would rather pay for ChatGPT at this point in my life than I would for email or for many other things. So it is the paying for different generative AI services like what's offered by OpenAI or Anthropic or the other ones is so fundamentally important to me, and I believe to most people that's probably the best money spent. I almost look at it like a simple example of this is a researcher in a lab that does reading research at Vanderbilt. Basically, they would have to generate sentences that have very specific structure. And it would take them weeks to come up with a full list of sentences that they could use for their experiments that had exactly the structure they needed. They can go and they can generate that same set of sentences to do their research in 30 seconds in ChatGPT. And that right there saves them 1 or 2 weeks worth of work and easily pays back the cost. And my experience has been for most people, if you go and dig into it and start educating yourself, there's so many different simple tasks where one task alone can completely, pay for these generative AI subscriptions. What are the merits of getting the 4.0 subscription? So a couple of things. So one, if you want to do the photograph stuff that I showed you, you need to have the paid subscription. You get better reasoning. And for many tasks, the better reasoning really matters. And so it's worth it. And then a lot of this stuff on automation around code interpreter that I showed, or advanced data analysis, that in order to do the visualizations and that, you need the paid subscription. Is it possible for ChatGPT to know how my day will go tomorrow? So I would say no, but if you gave it information in a prompt about here's what happened, context about my day, and then something, it could try to predict and try to reason about it. And, it's maybe if the task is specific and predictable enough, it might be able to do it. But in general, I don't think it's going to predict the future any better than we can as humans, unless it's something that AI is already good at predicting. Things that we can build predictors for with AI today, before ChatGPT, it can do very well in many cases. What is the difference between prompt engineering versus prompt design? So I think of prompt engineering, and I would say partially this term is, I would say, still in flux. What people believe prompt engineering is still in flux. My definition of prompt engineering is it encompasses not only how you write the prompts, how do you design the prompt and structure it, but also thinking through sequences of multiple prompts. How do you test it and make sure that it's valid and determine the accuracy? How do you, when a new model comes out, make sure that the prompt still works and maintain it? How do you adapt it? How do you do all kinds of things like that? So I think of prompt engineering as encompassing all of these things, whereas prompt design is maybe just how you write the text. But I think these are all terms that are still somewhat in flux. I managed to create the code of a rock, paper, scissors game without any coding skills. Do you think ChatGPT can be used for writing the code of more complex programs such as apps or website? It definitely can. One of my courses that I taught, PhD courses that I taught last semester, was on software engineering with AI. And it's going to completely transform how we do software engineering. Now, I would say that the current tools aren't quite there yet. So there's a limit to how big of a program that we can write with generative AI right now without human intervention. So are we going to just go in and say, write this and have it generate all the code for the app, regardless of sophistication and complexity? Probably not in the near term. But are we going to have tools that make it 1,000 times faster to do? Yes. And interact with a human back and forth to do it much, much faster and much, much lower cost? Absolutely. And I think those tools are being built today. But if you get to a certain level of sophistication, for a variety of reasons, one being that as a human being, I'm usually too inaccurate in describing what I want for it to do it on the first try and get it perfect, but also on limitations on the amount of data we can put into it and get out of it at once. All of these things limit how big of programs we can write right now. But we're going to, we are actively working on figuring out how to overcome those challenges. How does ChatGPT influence learning about software engineering? So this is a great question, and one that's very near and dear to my heart as a professor in computer science. So one, I think that we have to broaden our definition of computing and who's doing computing and what it means to be sort of like a software engineer, because a lot of people are going to be doing prompt engineering. I think most people are going to be solving problems by writing prompts that do what software today does. So we're not going to actually have to write code necessarily to solve all the computing problems that we have today. We're instead going to be able to write prompts that do the same things that that code would have been able to do, or write prompts that go and control the underlying computing, similar to when I was creating that PowerPoint, in order to solve problems for us. And so a lot of people are going to be engaged in computing in completely new ways that look like what software engineers do today. But at the same time, we're going to have more complex problems that require that deeper insight into software engineering, how to build bigger, more complicated systems, understanding architecture, algorithms, different design trade-offs. And so as a software engineer and students, what I want to tell people is what you really need to be focused on is that computational problem-solving part. When your teachers are telling you algorithms matter or architecture matters or this matters, well, it really matters now, because a lot of the low-level details of actually writing individual lines of code can be done by the generative AI. The other thing that's really important is, like, as you're learning to code, a lot of times people are focused on learning to write code and understand their own code, but they are not focused on developing the skill of understanding other people's code. And usually a lot of people will learn that in industry when they go and work on other people's code bases. But in school, a lot of people are focused on writing their own code. They're not reading and understanding other people's code. And you really want to be good at reading code when you're using generative AI to produce the code, because you have to understand what it's producing in order to reason effectively about how to follow up and tell it to improve and do things like that. Also, I would just say fundamentally, the more you understand about the domain that you're working in, the better output you can get out of the tools. So if I understand software engineering, I understand design principles, and I understand, like, functional programming or whatever it is, and I can express those things that I want, I'm more likely to get higher quality code. And we've done papers, we've actually benchmarked this in terms of how fast the code is that we get out. And if you're more explicit about what you want, you will get higher quality code if you explain exactly what it means. If you just say, give me code for this, it may or may not be good. But if you explain explicitly what you want, you're much more likely to get that high quality output. Looking at the current development of AI, do you think AI now or in the coming years automatically generates games, movies, and similar things? In other words, do you think AI can replace programming generation methods of some game software? So I think it's going to radically impact software engineering, and for sure generate lots and lots of parts of software, if not very large systems. I also think it's going to generate the content, like the content that goes into games. So you're going to have people who are going to think about themes and things like that, and then they're going to use these tools to rapidly generate content. Now, I imagine a world where I go to a service like, one of these streaming movie services like Netflix, and I go into the service and I can see what content is already there, or I can say, here's my prompt describing the movie I'd like to watch right now and what I would like it to be about and the themes. Go and generate the movie for me. And those platforms become content generation tools that I, as the end user and watcher, are empowered to use. I can go and create my own movie if I want to, that exactly fits what I'm kind of feeling like watching right now, or I can go and explore and discover other people's content. In the United States, there's been this big issue between the writers for the movies and the movie studios arguing about contracts. And the writers are worried that the movie studios will just use generative AI to eliminate them. I look at it as the movie studios should be worried, because I think Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and that are going to create movie generators long term. And the writers who really understand what makes great movies are going to be able to directly go in there and generate the movies that people consume. The people who really understand how to create great themes and ideas and describe it are going to be the ones who are empowered. And the movie studios are going to be the ones in trouble, in my perspective. Could be wrong, but that's where I think it's going. Let's see. Which is a better LLM to perform multimodal prompting, GPT-4 Vision or Google Gemini? So I don't have any concrete benchmarks for this. So I don't think I could pick one or the other. I have had great experience with GPT-4 Vision, and that's what I use. And so it's not perfect, but it's really good. But I haven't seen any concrete benchmarks, and I think it's going to be, I think you kind of have to go and experiment and see what works for you. As AI evolves and can develop apps and generate movies, do you believe there will be a new gadget to replace our phones, such as Vision Pro? Do I need to start learning hardware rather than software for career purposes? So I think software, honestly, is going to become even more important. And what I think is going to happen is now I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's something paradox. And basically the idea is that certain technological inventions radically reduce the cost of doing something. And that leads to an explosion in demand for that thing. And what I think is going to happen right now is we're going to have an explosion in the amount of software that we're generating and the complexity of that software, which is going to lead to even greater demand for software engineers, in my perspective. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have lots and lots of people generating their own software, generating their own prompts. All of this stuff is going to have to work together. And that's where expert software engineers and computer scientists are going to be needed, is to understand how do we manage this explosion of complexity in software, and also all of these different software applications, how do we maintain them, evolve them, build new tools with generative AI. All this stuff is going to be really important. Is Document Reader also available only in GPT Plus? I am not positive. I think ChatGPT Plus is required to have it upload PDFs, but I'm not positive. Anthropic has upload of documents as well, I believe. In the future, it is already obvious that AI is going to take over the entire technology industry. In your opinion, what other sectors of industry could experience massive growth and complement with AI and should be taken notice of? So certainly graphics processing like GPUs are going to be really important. I mean, this is going to have an explosion in demand, but I think it's really hard to predict. I think that I don't know. My typical answer is probably every industry is going to have a massive impact from this. I have a hard time, forecasting one way or the other, because I probably, honestly, I don't know enough about each individual domain probably to accurately forecast it. I would say software and computing, the demand for it's going to go through the roof is my expectation. And software engineers are going to be even more important and even more in demand as this evolves. Now, right now, people maybe aren't thinking that way, but based on what we're seeing in Vanderbilt and in the industry, I think it's going to explode in terms of demand in software engineering. Other domains, I think other domains like legal, people are worried, we won't need as many lawyers. My prediction in legal is that this leads to huge complexity and volume in what is done, in terms of, I don't see it like reducing legal at all. So I think I think it's hard to say, but I think a lot of industries, although people are saying, it's going to reduce the need for them, I think it may actually have the opposite effect. Does the language inputted affect the performance of ChatGPT? And I think the answer is yes. There's research that shows that certain languages for certain models don't work as well. On the other hand, don't ever underestimate their capabilities. So I have somebody that I've interacted with from a research perspective in the Netherlands, who has a really fascinating startup where they're using generative AI to analyze historical documents. And they have demos where they're taking 17th century Dutch shipping contracts and analyzing them with generative AI. And he asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to. And he said, should we write our prompts in English, Dutch, or 17th century Dutch to get the best performance? And I didn't know the answer to that. And he went off with his team and they figured out the answer to it, which was fascinating. And I've forgotten what it is. So I apologize in advance. They also looked at, should we translate them into modern Dutch and then prompt on them? And there's all these kind of questions that are unknown, which I think is part of the fun and why people should be engaging with this right now.
Dr. White, just mindful of the time. We actually have so many more questions. And audience, I really appreciate your questions. And perhaps what we can do is that we'll email the rest of the questions to Dr. White, and he will get back to us, and we'll post the questions on our social media. Maybe if you don't mind me asking just one last question. Sure. About the future of generative AI and AI in general. There's a lot of talk about this shift from generative AI to general AI. With that, would there be a need to learn prompt engineering? And what are your thoughts about how soon that might happen? And if even generative AI, should it be something that should be unleashed on us?
Yeah, well, I think of it this way, is right. Humans are general AI. You know, if you want to think about it, I think when they talk about it, they're really talking about something that's human level intelligence and sophistication. And we already have that, right? It's human beings, in my perspective. So this is obviously my perspective on it. Now, do you still need to learn how to prompt engineering, how to interact with these tools? And I think the answer is absolutely. Until the tools can directly read your mind, you are still going to have to express the problem to them, express what your desires are and what you're trying to get. And the more effectively you express yourself, the more effectively it's going to be able to solve the problem. And I think that's the same thing that we see when you express the problem to a human being. If you want another human being who is general intelligence to solve the problem, you still have to express yourself and have to think about how to express the problem to them and all of the constraints. And I think as long as we're using this in the, I want it to solve my problem, how we interact and think about it. Now, I look at it more like, everybody's talking about an AI and thinking about a replacement. I don't think of it like that. I think of it more like CPUs, right? This is a fundamentally new computing capability. And general AGI, I think of it as like the super advanced CPU that we can then tap into to solve all types of problems. And I also suspect that what we're going to see, in my opinion, is something that looks like with CPUs, where at the beginning, it looks like it will go up forever. And everybody predicts, well, it'll keep doubling or whatever forever. But then at some point, due to some constraint, we level off. Does that mean we won't have huge impact? I think there'll still be huge impact. And I think we're at the very beginning, particularly from this vision where it's amplifying and augmenting us as humans. But I'm excited about it, not worried about AGI. I'm excited about getting something like that so I can do even more with it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great question.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your sharing. And I have to say, I love your metaphor on it being an exoskeleton of the mind. I love that metaphor. So with that, let me just share my slide. Give me a moment. So with that, we come to the end of the session. I hope you have gleaned as many useful ideas as I have, and be able to apply them immediately into your learning, to turbo boost your learning, to turbo boost your work processes with Gen AI. If you wish to learn more about generative AI tools, news, and I think, Dr. Jules, you have one more up and coming course in Coursera, right? I just received an email.
Yes, I have one on all the vision, and I have about 6 courses total. So the prompt engineering is the first one, and then I have a number of other ones, and vision is one that just came out recently.
Yeah, I received that email. So please do subscribe to the Inspire social media channels, and you'll get updated on this news. So as mentioned, the slides and the video snippets will be up on our social media channel once they are ready. So do follow us on our social media. And please take a few minutes to give us your feedback on the session and any other learning topics you wish to know more about. Inspire will look into it. So with that, we thank Dr. Jules White so much for the wonderful sharing, and wish you all a pleasant week ahead, and see you at the next Inspire Learning session. Bye. Good night.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll email you the questions.
Okay, great.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Yeah. Thank you.